Over the weekend, I bought literally the best setting book for D&D that I have ever bought. This is not a joke, this is not an exaggeration, and we're gonna be checking it out this week. Let's go. Friends and neighbors, countrymen and colleagues, welcome back to the channel. My name is Garmin. This, of course, is the Storycraft Society, and this week I'm excited to do another book review for you all. Now, on the channel so far, we have only ever talked about books that get me super jazzed up. I really enjoy talking about books that get me excited. And this one right here, as of recently, certainly has been the one that has taken the cake. I was on a ski trip vacation with my family up near Pittsburgh this past weekend. I threw my back out and didn't get to ski. But I got to go to a bunch of cool game stores instead. One of them being a store called Game Masters. And while in Game Masters, I ended up finding this book. It is called Brancalonia. It is a setting, specifically a spaghetti fantasy setting for 5th edition D&D. And when I talk about what is a perfect setting book for me and my style of Dungeons and Dragons, this book is it. It is the exact type of product that I would want to release for my setting of Tracina in the future, and I'm so excited to talk to you all about it this week because there is so many cool things to get through. So, without any further ado, let's jump into it. So to get this started off right, let's talk about what Brancalonia is as a setting. Well, it's based on Italian tradition, folklore, history, landscapes, literature, and pop culture. You will get to enter the kingdom of Brancalonia, a land full of pitfalls and money-making opportunities, where you will get to create your own band of knaves. These are going to be your PCs in the game that can enlist in a free company, get some well-paid jobs, deliver a fist and knife buffet to those who have it coming, and once they have collected a tidy sum and somewhat climbed the ranks of their company, they'll be ready to try their luck in that final job that could enable them to go out in a blaze of glory. After all, what could possibly go wrong? This setting is all about everything being amplified up to 10. The quintessential bard who is absolutely rakish and over the top and over gestures. The thief who doesn't have the self-will to not pickpocket the bad guy. The knights errant paladin who is so sure of himself and his righteous cause that he is totally blind to his own faults. This is a setting where everything is amped up to give the most ridiculous, over-the-top role-playing experience. In the book, you will find a description of the Kingdom of Brancalonia, its history, its main regions, 5 new playable races. We're going to get into that later, which is a spectacular part of this book. 12 new subclasses, 1 for each of the basic subclasses. New backgrounds, talents, equipment, and magic items, all that fit the Brancalonian style. There's going to be secrets, threats, curiosities, places of interest, rumors, hints for the condottiero. That is a butchering of that word, I'm sure, and also what the Brancalonian system and setting calls the Dungeon Master. New setting rules like dive games, brawls, shoddy equipment, misdeeds, notoriety, bounties, den management, revels, and prophecies. All this stuff is going to bring all kinds of flavor to your game. Even if you don't run Brancalonia as your setting, you could import all this stuff into your setting. 6 adventures, as well as 24 new monsters and antagonists that are all inspired by Italian history, tradition, and folklore. There's also a ton of other things in this book, so with that quick overview, if that's enough to sell you on the book, go buy it. But if that's not, let's start looking at all the things specifically. First of all, the art style of this book, basically start to finish, is absolutely perfect in my opinion, but we'll get into that. So when you flip the front cover, the first thing that you get is this absolutely gorgeous Brancalonian map. Now, the one negative that I have found from this book that I will say that I mean, it's hard to say dislike, but is something that I wish would have happened. You do not get a large poster version of this map. This is something that I would hang up in my game room for sure. So I kind of wish that there would have been something like that came with the book, but otherwise you get this absolutely gorgeous map here. You can see the Italian influence for sure. But now we're going to go to one of my favorite parts of the book and the biggest selling point that I personally have for the book. So what it says here is the Royal Brancalonian Library, 1021 after the fall. This book was damaged by this guy that stained it in many places, making some passages illegible. The Vandal made amends with Capons 2 and short sausages in a number of 3, and then it's signed by the librarian. This is such an awesome feature because it makes this feel like it is a book straight out of the world. And now there are a bunch of places in the book where you can find the wine stains that Da Vinci ended up spilling his wine all over the book and messed it up. I just think that that is 10 out of 10, 100% the best kind of bookmaking for role-playing games. Let's continue. So we have our table of contents, it's got credits. One of my favorite things that I've ever seen in a setting book ever, which is references and inspiration, where they tell you what movies inspire this setting, what essays, literature and folktales, comics, all things that you could give to your players to be like, this is the setting we're going to be playing in. Watch and read up on this stuff so that you really get the flavor of where you're going. So now here's a bit on Brancalonian knaves. That's your PCs, what they're going to be. I shouldn't say what, but who they are going to be, the types of characters that make a lot of sense in this setting. And then of course it gives you a quick rundown of how to run your game, bands and companies, the Brancalonian job, the condottiero, which is your dungeon master. And again, I apologize for the pronunciation. The types of heroes and importing knaves from outside the kingdom, a whole bit on try to stay away from bringing elves and dwarves and things into this setting because then that ruins the magic of this setting. I think that this book is fantastic. I don't know that I will ever run a game in Brancalonia, but I will tell you I'm going to import a lot of the stuff from this book into my setting. And I think that that's where a book like this really has its magic stored up. Yeah, if this setting speaks to you and it makes you really want to run in it, go for it. But I think infinitely more dungeon masters will just find inspiration in a book like this than necessarily a setting that they're going to import into their game. So with that said, the next thing is the first major big cool thing that isn't the opening thing. I like a lot of things in this book. Okay, so it is the races. So because of Brancalonia being what it is very real feeling, kind of low fantasy would be my description of it. So there are fantasy races, but for the most part, everything is humanocentric. The races are a little bit different, and I will give you some examples here. There is the regular human, which gives you the stuff that they would have. But then the next race is the gifted, which is also a human, but it's like an intellectual type human that is distinct from humans in the sense that they have this super intelligence, but at the end of the day, they are also humans. The next one is the Morgant, which is a half giant. Again, human, but characterized different as their bigger size. I just think that that's such a genius way to go. The Sylvan, these were the specimens of a race of hominids with traits more feral than regular humans. Again, look like humans, act like humans, maybe a little bit more body hair, but they're a little bit more feral of a race. The next one is the first true fantasy race that this setting has, which is the marionette, and I just love this. You can play as a Puppo or a Pinocchio. You know, it's Italian fantasy, so you have these wooden marionettes that have come to life running around. I love that. And then the last sort of fantasy race is like their take on the tiefling, which is the Malbranche. Basically what happens is demons who go through this process called the Great Refusal, which is a sort of like rebirth into the earthly world, they can choose to turn into some kind of a mortal form. So again, they look human, but then they are actually descended from being devils. And this is a really interesting thing because now there's a lot of role-playing opportunity. If one of your characters is a Malbranche running around with a bunch of humans, the humans wouldn't necessarily know. And everyone basically looks human except for the marionettes. So this whole section, really, really neat. Another really neat aspect of the Brancalonian setting is that it is also not just low fantasy, but it is also low power. So the maximum level that a character can get to in this setting is 6. Now I will say, After 6, there is a bunch of super feats that you can end up taking. So if you go from, let's say, level 6 to level 7, you then start being able to take Knave's Emeritus feats, which are things like increasing your proficiency bonus, or now you can take the help action as a bonus action, things like that. So you do get more powerful, but your hit points max out at level 6. And I like the idea of, in this setting, an ancient red dragon will mess up even the most amazing adventurer in the land. With that said, they also have a bunch of classes, but all of their subclasses, one for each of the 12 main classes from the player's handbook, only go to level 6. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but there are things like the Pagan Barbarian, the Miraculous Cleric, the Sword Fighter. This is a very like Three Musketeers kind of feeling thing. The Friar Monk, which is just like a beat stick monk, which is pretty neat. The Knights Errant Paladin, the Superstition Sorcerer, and the Jinx Warlock. I think the Jinx Warlock is my favorite, but you got to get the book if you want to check that out. On top of a bunch of new personalities and backgrounds that you can get, of course, all backgrounds are awesome because they let your characters tie into the story of the world. They then give you a bunch of cool new feats, and a lot of these feats are not just specific to the setting. So for example, there is this Jibber Jabberer feat. You are able to fool other creatures with an unrivaled combination of self-confidence, gab, and nonsense, as if you are a high-ranking guard. Which again is just a funny way to say that. You gain the following benefits. You gain proficiency in knowing crazy people don't know they're crazy, and you know that you're crazy, therefore you're not crazy, and that's pretty crazy indeed. Savvy? This book is just so 10 out of 10. You have 2 Jibber Jabber dice, which are D4s. Use those dice to enhance your Jibber Jabber. A Jibber Jabber die is expended when you use it. You regain all your expended Jibber Jabber dice when you finish a short or long rest. And then also, when a creature that you can see within 60 feet of you makes an attack roll, ability check, or damage roll, you can use a reaction to expend one of your Jibber Jabber dice, rolling a Jibber Jabber die, and subtracting the number rolled from the creature's roll. This kind of thing could be used in any game of D&D, but it just has so much flavor tied into this setting. And all of the feats have this level of awesomeness. Now, there are things like Malebauge Nostalgia or Seasoned Wood that are specific to the Malebranche and Marionette, but there's still so many other things in this setting that you could really pull from. And then, of course, again, at the end of that chapter, you have all of the Knave's Emeritus, which are advances beyond the 6th level. So the next thing is going to be special setting rules. This is going to be things like shoddy and counterfeit equipment. So there is basically equipment in this setting that is crappy, and when you roll a natural 1, it breaks, and you have disadvantage attacking with it until you use an action to fix it. You have a whole bunch of information on companies and bounty brothers, as well as places where your knaves can hang out. Grand luxuries like the black market, a cantina, a distillery, a forge, a stable. Then there's a whole bit on misdeeds, bounties, and notoriety. So this setting is set around the idea that you're playing a bunch of low-life knaves that are going to get into trouble with the law. So there's all kinds of things that will talk to you about what happens when you do a misdeed and how much your bounty will be. For example, poaching or smuggling of animals will get you an 8 gold piece bounty. Well, I can already hear the players saying, why would I want to do anything if it gets me a bounty? Well, the answer is notoriety. When you get your bounty up to a certain level, other knaves will respect and fear you. So what that'll end up doing is gaining you charisma bonuses to things like your persuasion or intimidation checks by how high your bounty is. So there are characters in Brancalonia that would be encouraged to get a higher and higher bounty. Let's talk about one of the biggest mechanics in this game that I am absolutely lifting out of this book and using in my home games, the brawl mechanic. So in an effort to make this world feel real, when you get into a fist fight in a tavern, you are not going to pull out your great axe and cut off the arms and legs of the people that you are fighting in the tavern. That is going to make you a murderer, and all of the kingdoms around are going to arrest you and lock you up for the rest of your life. So what this system does is it gives gives the players an out of a way to get into those fights in taverns and in cities and with guards and whoever, and not end up taking the bounty of a murderer. So the way that a brawl works, and I'm not going to go over every specific thing, is every single player gets a whole bunch of moves that they can use in brawls. That's why your PC who built this super awesome character who is made to martially fight will be happy to go into a brawl instead of a regular fight, because these are maneuvers that only can be used when you are in a brawl. Some of those things are ace in the hole, like it's a super move, some are class specific, some are magic moves, some are general moves, and then of course the condottiero can import a whole bunch of stray dangers into the fight, like River of Beer. Every brawl participant must succeed on a DC 13 dex save or be knocked prone. Hit points are different in brawls as well. So what you end up taking are levels of wax. And so level 1 is bruised, which causes you to suffer 1 less AC. That continues to beaten, injured, damaged, and crushed, all of which lower your AC by 1. As you're getting punched and beaten on, you become slower and therefore easier for your enemies to hit you, until finally at level 6, you are unconscious, which knocks you out of the brawl. Notice, it's not taking your hit points away, it is just knocking you out. I think that this brawl feature is absolutely choice. I can't wait to see what that looks like in my games. There's a bunch of other things in this book that are fantastic for downtime, like dive games and revelry tables, getting your knaves to go out and have a good time. A bunch of pages on magical junk, and the magical junk, which again is very funny as far as titles for a chapter, in this book are so fitting of the setting. I'm going to go over 2 examples of this. The first one is the Dagger of Terror. This weapon, perhaps cursed, does not seem to want to harm people, and for some unknown reason, it is able to scream warnings to those attacked by it. When you make an attack against a humanoid creature, the dagger starts screaming in vernacular, "Run! They want to stab you! Run!" That is hilarious, particularly if you give it to a character or a player who doesn't know that it's cursed. The next one is going to be the Moody Weapon. When you make an attack with this magical weapon and roll a 1 on the d20 for the attack roll, the weapon switches and becomes a different random weapon. The condottiero can choose the new weapon. Really nice, and all of the items are that cool. We have a whole chapter on memorabilia. That's basically like a random trinket table, which is nice. And then we get into running the game. So running Brancalonia gives a bunch of stuff for the condottiero to explain how to run the whole game, basically, right? Stuff from talking about your first session to the kingdom justice system, what happens when you get in trouble, royal bounties, unwritten laws, that sort of thing. Creating adventures in Brancalonia. A dive generator so that you can help make dives for your knaves to hang out in. And again, this dive generator could be used for this game, but it also could be used in your home game to make seedy, crappy locations. A whole bit on placing prophecies in the game, and then of course it gets into the lore of the world. Things like hasty history of the kingdom, the map with its amazing stains on it, and then it's going to go through all of the different locations. Now, I am not going to torture you with going through each one of these, but look at all these locations that it gives you as places where your knaves can adventure. This is absolutely spectacular, and it gives you so much to choose from as a DM, as a condottiero. Another amazing stained page. Just absolutely tons and tons and tons of this stuff. And I am absolutely drawing this on, but that's how much stuff that I just flipped through that you're going to get as far as lore on all the different places in Brancalonia. After one last bit for adventuring beyond the kingdom's borders, then it jumps into the adventurers. And it gives you a pretty good sized chunk, but that's full of all these different scenes that you will play out with your knaves, as well as the battle maps that you would need. Finishing that all up, the last thing that happens is new monsters and enemies, and it gives you a bunch of pages of these awesome different monsters and non-player characters and common enemies, all of which based on the Italian folklore tradition. Really, really, really great stuff. But There's so much in this book. I could talk for another hour about it. I'm not going to, but I could. Let's jump back up and I will wrap this thing up for y'all. When someone asks me the question of what do you look for in a setting book, I always struggle to come up with the answer. There's so many different things that I like. When I'm looking at something like the Kobold Press Midgard World book, its sheer size is impressive to me, and it gives so many things that I can mine lore from. There is Critical Role's Tal'Dorei setting or Wildmount setting. Both of those I have a personal, heartfelt connection to because of my love of those settings, which makes me want to mine things out of it. This setting has neither of those two things. I was not emotionally connected to it when I pulled it off of the shelf at Game Masters, and also it was not so thick and so jam-packed full of lore and stuff that I felt like it was silly to not buy it. So what was it? Well, art style goes a long way. And obviously the flavor of the book goes a long way. One of the first things that I flipped to in the book was the stained pages. That was just by accident, but when I flipped to them and then saw in the front that it was referenced, immediately my heart started to beat faster because I got so excited about this style of setting, and I knew where the writers of this book were headed. If anything that I've said sounds good to you, you should absolutely check this book out. I can't recommend it enough. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments if you already have this book or if you plan on buying it in the future. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. That costs you absolutely nothing, but it helps us out greatly, so I would appreciate that so much if you just take the 2 seconds to just click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you want to know when our videos go live every week. Lastly, the #1 way that you can help a small YouTube channel out is to share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it. Getting someone else brought into the fold of the Storycraft Society just makes the whole family bigger, and that makes my heart explode with joy. So, thank you so much for watching, and until next week, I'll be seeing you. It's good. I'm telling you, it's good.